Right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to kind of carry on talking about unwrapping, but using this little tree here. Now, if you haven't seen part one and part two of this, you can find those videos on my channel. But basically, part one I built it, and then part two I was very lazy and I unwrapped it using Smart Project. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go on to the creation of seams so that you can actually control the unwrapping process in more detail. So let me show you how this works when we're doing seams. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that when it unwraps, certain parts are attached to each other properly, basically so that they're not breaking apart and going all over the place like we have here. In order to do that, it's a good idea to actually go into face mode and kind of select some key areas that you feel are connected. So I'm going to grab hold of these first and foremost because these are my main trunk. Now I want to get a bit of control over these, and I'm probably going to have to go back into it a few times. So I'm going to go down here to data. I'm going to add a vertex group, and I'm going to call this vertex group trunk, and then I'm going to assign it. Now what I should be able to do is select and deselect those particular UVs. Now, how do we use seams? So what we need to do with using seams is use, ideally, a edge select mode. And what we do is, because this is kind of like a cylinder, we just pick one particular point that we feel that it should kind of unwrap with. And then what we do is we head up here, or we press U on our keyboard, and we mark that seam. Now when I select this trunk again and go up to angle based unwrap, hopefully you can see now what's happened is it chose this path here as our kind of unwrap point, the place that you pull it apart by. And what we have over here now is just just a little bit more, control, because these pieces are still stuck together. And that's a good thing, because if they're stuck together, we know that they go together. Now, I could potentially go a bit further with my unwrapping, because what we're going to have here is we're going to have some deforms. So basically, in order to stick those together and have them, line up properly, that's all very well and good if you're just doing three pieces that are next to each other. However, in order to fit these pieces, let me just select them again, here, they're actually getting distorted. So basically they're being stretched and twisted in order to make sure that these three big ones up here have good proportions. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible to get perfect unwrapping with every single little thing the right size. What I'm saying is sometimes you have to accept a little bit of wiggle room. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to mark these seams here, UV, and then mark them. And again, when I select and I actually go up and I unwrap them, now what we've got is those seams. I keep getting my side here. Get my seams here have pulled apart further, and what we're going to end up with is we're going to end up with these being a lot more proportional, actually closer to the proportions of the 3D model. And this is just so useful when you're unwrapping things. Now, the thing is, that's easy enough for something like a trunk like that, because there's not many pieces together to actually play around with. However, we do, start getting into problems when we start doing things like branches. And if I actually select this set of branches here, And you'll start to see how, even using seams, distortion is quite problematic. So I'm going to select those. I'm going to make sure I've got this one on the top as well. And I'll show you the unwrap. Oh, not the Smart Project version. And it looks like that, and they're separated out. And they've got reasonably good proportions, but the problem is they're not attached next to each other. So when you go in and do a proper texture, they don't kind of line up as well as they should do, and it's harder to get a continuous texture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new group. I'm going to lock that trunk as well so I don't accidentally pick it up. And then I'm going to assign that branch. There we go. I'm going to call this branch 1. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to pick a seam. Now, picking a seam on this is actually quite different. I'm going to kind of go for here as my seam to begin with. And I'm going to show you what happens when I mark that seam. And then with you, again, I'm going to do an angle-based unwrap with it. Now, again, you can see that it's split along that seam, but then it's tried to keep all the other pieces together, and it's created distortion because it's trying its best to link every single one of these. And those islands just don't work together. Now, I'm going to add another seam up here. In fact, I'm going to add 2 seams and find it. Oh, do you know what I've done here? I've accidentally put my seam there, and I didn't mean to. My seam should have been there. It's not going to make a major difference, but I think it's best that I correct this. Yeah. There we go. So yeah, I'm going to add a couple more seams. So up on this top bit, I'm actually only wanting it to be connected to one face. Now I'm going to choose this face here that it's connected to. Again, U, mark seam. And then just a little thing starts to make little tiny differences. So you can see now, rather than this UV being stretched across all 3, it's independent, it's been disconnected. Okay, how do I then start pulling these apart? Because they're obviously very distorted. I've tried different things to try and get these to map better. I have to admit though, one of the problems you've got is, say I decide to split here. So say I took these ones and decided to mark a seam on them and then unwrap them. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't have quite the same effect. What it's done is it has separated them out, but now, unfortunately, this one is kind of wrapping over this one, so they're layering over each other. So unfortunately, you can't just start pulling all your seams apart and hoping, well, maybe this will work. Again, if I at least keep that one connected, it's a bit better, but we've still got this kind of problem going on that things are being distorted. I have tried lots of different ways to approach this. One kind of good way to do it is actually stagger your seams. I'm just going to clear that one off a second. And sometimes staggering your seams doesn't always work, so let's hope this works. Does start to help keep things proportionate. In fact, I should be able to mark that seam as well, and hopefully you can see it's allowing them to spread out a bit safely and maintain a certain amount of control over the seams. And it's just basically that. I'm kind of staggering where I actually put the seam in order to create more clear cuts, but of course it's a long process. You've got to get everything in the right place as you go. But as you can see, my islands are definitely a lot cleaner. And it's really just an experiment of working out which seams produce the result that's closest to getting everything proportional. The problem is if you start splitting things too far apart, when you're creating these textures here, you've got big wide gaps between each one, and that can be problematic if you want a nice smooth texture that doesn't look like it's been stitched together later on. But you can attempt to just carefully decide where you put those cuts, and I do find that staggering my cuts in places can be useful and can be helpful, creating nice clean cuts. Of course, if you're completely obsessive, you can individually place every single one, but you'll be at that for a very long time. Yes, your UV mat would be perfect without any distortion, but you would be at it for so long that you wouldn't really be, you'd only get a minor improvement in texture quality. So this is just a useful little way to think about starting to use seams to pull apart a model, and to actually think about where the cuts come into it and how you can use it to kind of pull parts and create cleaner UV islands. Of course, it's going to take a long time to fully unwrap this entire tree, but when I'm done, what will happen is I can then, I'll just shrink this down, and I'll select this, and then what I can do later on is then I can line them all up and scale them to the right size and so on, so that my whole model is a lot better put together. And there we go, that's just a brief introduction to using seams on a model to help plan out your UV mapping.